You're watching Press TV's News Review, where we look deeper into some of the top stories of the day. Stay tuned, everybody. On this news review, the U.S. Senate has approved a bill that would impose sanctions on China for what it calls undermining Hong Kong's autonomy. The bill targets Chinese officials and Hong Kong's police, as well as banks that conduct significant transactions with them. The draft, however, still needs to be approved by the House of Representatives. The vote comes as China is pressing forward with a security law that would enforce punishment over subversion and other perceived threats in Hong Kong. The law resulted in massive protests last year, as opponents argue it would be a blow to Hong Kong's civil liberties. Beijing views the protests as a plot by foreign powers to destabilize mainland China. Joining us on this edition of the News Review, we have Jim W. Dean, Managing Editor at Veterans Today, joining us from Grand Rapids. Also, we have political commentator Jason Unruhe joining us from Niagara Falls. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Jim W. Dean. Sir, first of all, give us your thoughts on the entirety of this bill that has been passed by Senate. And it still looks like tensions are cranking up between Washington and Beijing.
Well, we have a Congress, both sides, both houses and both parties, always loving to have a good boogeyman to use during an election year to show that they're defending America from so many big bad wolves across the world, so that they're earning their pay. But the backdrop here, which unfortunately many Americans have no clue on, is that this act that China has passed has not really been an offensive one whatsoever, but it's just been a reaction to what the U.S. is doing, and wait for, is just trying to attempt another color revolution in Hong Kong. Why? Because this is what a main part of U.S. foreign policy, that any country, any area that it doesn't feel that it has under its control has to be put under its control. And the name of the game now is always to start color revolutions. Then it accuse the host country when it reacts to these as oppressing their people, and then therefore the U.S. has to get involved to save them. It's an obvious game. Everybody in the diplomatic corps and the intelligence corps knows that this is what's going on. And so here we go. The Congress is completely duped on it. And China, of course, is trying not to get sucked into this. It wants to, its main goal is to not to jeopardize the trade relations. But that's kind of really up in the air now, with Trump really under assault by all the goofs he's made in his campaign. So call it the good old Israeli chaos theory and destabilization. This is what the public pays for government. Instead of doing stuff, they're just creating chaos all over the world that they can exploit to their own advantage.
Jason Unruhe, this is a bipartisan bill, but there's still a question of whether the White House will implement it, because it will demand mandatory sanctions. What do you think?
Well, I think that there's a collective interest, regardless if it's Democrat or Republican. There will be some kind of motion against China for what the U.S. claims is human rights abuses. Obviously, it's in the interest of the U.S. empire to undermine any challenge or threat to it, and the biggest one that there is China. One of the best ways to undermine them would be to separate them from Hong Kong, which is a major financial hub that China certainly does have access to. So I think it's very clear that this is really a bipartisan issue. Both the Republicans and the Democrats are certainly behind this, as they both perceive China to be their enemy, the enemy of the U.S. empire. I think it's something that very easily bridges both parties and should not present any kind of obstacle. I don't see the Democrats opposing Trump on this in any way, or maybe Trump opposing it because he thinks the Democrats want to do it. I think this is going to go through very quickly. It's a completely bipartisan issue.
Well, Jim W. Dean just said maybe Trump has bigger fish to fry with his sights set on the trade deal. Jason, that was for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I mean, I said Jim W. Dean believes that Trump will probably oppose it because he has bigger fish to fry. He has his sights set on the trade deal with China. He wants to see if he can balance out a bargaining act with Beijing at this point.
I don't really see that being the case because I think a deal can still be hammered out otherwise. I still do think that in the current political sphere, both parties do perceive China to be a threat. So I definitely see it's possible to still hammer out some kind of a trade deal. There's a chance I could be wrong, but I think that the overall interest of the ruling class in the United States is to undermine China as a rising power. So I think they're probably both going to come to terms on that one.
Jim W. Dean, what kind of a response are you expecting to see from Beijing at this point?
I think Beijing is going to hold its cards close to its vest. It's not about to let a foreign power, even though the U.S. wants to come in there and take advantage of the Hong Kong and try to break that up. The Chinese are going to handle it. They're not going to overreact, but they are in no way are they going to let the U.S. come in there and get the Democracy Now movements and disrupt that. And they're going to stick to their guns. And we're going to see, we're all going to see what's happened. We may not have to wait long to find out.
Jason, do you agree with that? China's not going to overreact at this point?
I really don't think so. China has a very long history of very calmly reacting to things like this. They know very well not to instigate or to provoke the situation any further by some kind of rash act. We did see with a lot of the protests that have occurred in the past year and a half, thereabouts year and a half, that the police were actually fairly reserved when compared to the actions of many police over the last couple of weeks with regards to various affiliated Black Lives Matter movements. So China is very smart in this case, and they will play it in the right way.
Thanks a lot, gentlemen. Political commentator Jason Unruhe joining us from Niagara Falls, and Jim W. Dean, managing editor at Veterans Today, joining us from Grand Rapids, Michigan. With that, it brings us to an end here on this edition of the News Review, but do stay tuned. There's plenty more to come here on Press TV. Bye for now.